name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. As we reflect on the scriptures together, we are conscious that we are on Indigenous land, and I was so distracted by welcoming the choir, I forgot to acknowledge country before, but of course we're always conscious that our cathedral stands on Bundjalung land. This morning we were going to be baptising 2 children, and my machine has just decided to be silly. That's better. So we were going to be baptising 2 children this morning, but for different COVID-related reasons, both families have had to postpone the baptisms to a later date. Had we had the baptisms, we certainly had a fantastic gospel reading in particular to reflect on together. So without the baptisms, without the babies being here, let's nonetheless pay attention to these scriptures which invite us into the mystery of what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. We're starting with the tiny snippet we had from the book of Job, and that's better. Siri thought she could help me by transcribing everything I'm saying, but I really don't need that at the moment. We're going to start with the book of Job, we had a section of that in our first reading this morning, and the Old Testament book of Job is a book it's the only book of its kind, really, in the Old Testament. It's one of the great spiritual classics of the world, which of course doesn't mean it's an easy book to read, far from it. This is a book which wrestles with the existential question of why bad things happen to good people. And Job is set up by the storyteller as the quintessential good guy. He does everything right, way back in the first couple of chapters of the book of Job. So what we have is a complex discussion. It's a 12,674-word essay in Hebrew, creating a complex discussion as Job, the leading character in this story, is beset by a series of disasters which take away his health and his family and his wealth, and he's left with nothing except a wife who keeps saying, "Why don't you curse God and he'll strike you dead and we'll be done with this," which is not the most helpful partner for Job to have had at that point in the story. But it gets worse. Job had 3 very religious friends, and they were very confident of their beliefs. So they turn up to comfort him, and so we get the expression in English, Job's comforter. Their idea of comforting Job was to lecture him about all the faults which he must surely have committed in order for all these bad things to happen to him. Not exactly comforting. Indeed, they're actually more interested in defending their idea of God than in comforting Job. They're not there to be with Job and in compassionate solidarity. They're wanting to justify the way they see the world and to persuade Job that he must have done something to deserve everything. So they take it in turns to lecture Job, and he takes turns at defending himself. And as we go through, eventually the 3 older friends give up, and then a younger associate steps forward and takes it upon himself to show Job and his 3 friends where all of them are wrong. And so by then, we've finally reached chapter 37 in the book of Job. And then we come to today's reading, where finally, at the start of chapter 38, God turns up. And when God turns up, God puts everyone else in their place. And we heard that in those rather in-your-face reading, the words that we heard from Job this morning. God will keep doing that for another 4.5 chapters, having his say at the end of the book. And then at the end, in the last few verses, Job gets everything back. which is the passage we're going to read next week. And it's the least satisfying part of the book of Job. Because in the end, when bad things have happened to good people, we don't get our life back, do we? But that's where the book of Job ends up. But in the snippet we read this morning, we're confronted, and Job in the story is confronted with the awesome nature of the universe in which he lived and we live and of which we are a part. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have any understanding. God's a bit sarcastic as well. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly hosts shouted for joy? In biblical language, we'd say that Job is being confronted by the awesome glory of God. In our own language these days, as we face the awesome scale and age and complexity of the universe, we are blown away by the immensity of it all, by the diversity of life, by our own vulnerability and insignificance. And so the psalm, which is always chosen in the Sunday morning service, the psalm is a response always to the first reading. You will have noticed it began, "O Lord my God, how great you are." Like, wow, I should have realized that. And then we slip over to Hebrews. It's a time in the church year when we're filling in the Sundays before we get to Advent. So we're reading bits of the Bible we don't normally read. And Hebrews is one of those bits. Again, an unusual book, one of a kind in the New Testament, an incredibly Jewish book, which is written specifically for Jewish followers of Jesus. And in this book, Jesus is imagined as a Jewish priest, which of course he wasn't. But that doesn't stop the letter to the Hebrews imagining him that way. And similarly with the book of Job, the point of these stories is not that we have to believe that description is correct, but we need to pay attention to what the story is talking about. What are the spiritual themes that are being wrestled with in these texts? So for the anonymous author who wrote this letter to the Jewish believers, Paul was like a mysterious character called Melchizedek. And congratulations to Roger for just flowing over that word without any hesitation at all. It's one of those words, if you pause, you're sunk. Okay? Melchizedek. It's a Hebrew word that means king of righteousness. And this character appears once in the book of Genesis and once in a psalm, and then several times in the book of Hebrews. Okay. So we didn't know much about this character. Turns out he also appears in the Dead Sea Scrolls, more or less contemporary with the time of Jesus. And that is probably the clue as to why the author of the letter to the Hebrews is pulling on this idea, but that's a topic for another day. What we do find happening in this passage in Hebrews is that the author is stressing the humanity of Jesus. He's convinced that Jesus is this awesome Melchizedek-like character chosen by God, but he also realizes that Jesus was just like us. In the days of his flesh, he writes, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. So alongside the awesome power and shock and awe demonstration in the book of Job, we now have another reading this morning which is stressing, despite his status as the chosen one, Jesus is one with us. He's just like us. Emmanuel, God with us, even perhaps God as one of us. And the mysterious and awesome other in whose shadow we shrink from view is also the familiar Jesus who comes alongside us as one of us, who's beset by our challenges and who cries out to God for rescue. My God, why have you forsaken me? Or as Hebrews says, although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and having been made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. So how do we respond to this Holy One, this awesome one, who comes among us gently, and we, in old language we might almost say meekly, and invites us to walk his way, to follow his path? Well, the third reading, our gospel, offers us a glimpse into that answer. And this second half of Mark chapter 10 is another key text certainly within the New Testament. And it teases out the idea of vocation and the idea of discipleship. Notice first of all how James and John, two of Jesus' favourites, the inner circle of three, Peter, James and John, and they're trying to edge Peter out a bit, perhaps. Don't you love Christians? So they approach Jesus with a special favour. We want the best seats and the most important jobs in the kingdom. That's all. That's what we'd like you to do for us. Like rub the lamp, see what the genie will offer. And notice then Jesus' reply to him. You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with? And they replied, sure we are. We're fishermen. We can do anything. Well, Jesus said, you are actually going to drink the cup I drink, and you are going to go through the same overwhelming experience of horror in the baptism which I'm going to be baptized, but you don't get the best seats. They're not mine to give away. And you're missing the point, guys. Let's stay with that idea. Are we able to drink the cup that Jesus drinks? Are we able to be baptized with the baptism? Are we able to share in the baptism of Jesus? And he clearly doesn't mean his baptism by John. He means this ordeal that he's walking towards as he heads to Jerusalem. Can we drink the cup that Jesus drank? Can we walk the path that Jesus walked? Those are awesome questions, and they echo across 2,000 years to us here in the cathedral this morning, or wherever we're watching and participating in the service from. Are we up to this Jesus thing? Are we able to do it? Are we willing to do it? Are we dedicated enough to do it as individuals and as a cathedral community? A couple of years ago, when I tried to describe the mission of this cathedral for the website, I expressed it this way: a generous faith community centred on Jesus, seeking wisdom for life, acting with compassion in the heart of Grafton since 1842. That's one of the ways we drink the cup. That's one of the ways we walk the path of Jesus, to be that kind of compassionate, Jesus-centred community, seeking wisdom for life, acting with compassion, and here for the long haul, not here today and gone tomorrow. Is that the cup we're prepared to drink? Is that a path we're prepared to walk? Is that a baptism through which we are willing to pass? And in case we're wondering what that looks like in real life, as Jesus kind of hoses down the outrage amongst the other disciples, he points out, whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. And then the punchline, for the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. While our worship, and particularly on a day when we have the choir back, while our worship draws us in to see a glimpse of the awesome God, may we never lose sight of the radical humility of the Holy One who comes among us and alongside us and offers us the privilege of drinking from the same cup that he himself has chosen to accept. We're not just asked to believe things about Jesus. That'd be way too easy. Discipleship goes much further than that. Rather than being asked to believe things about Jesus, we are asked to walk the way of Jesus in compassionate humility and for the sake of others, never for our own sake. We are called to be Jesus for the sake of the world, for the sake of our local community, for the sake of our loved ones, and even, in the end, for our own sake. Amen.